here we are. It's our second week of exploring this theme, celebrating spiritual community through praying together. This month we are using as a resource book, a book called How to Use Spiritual Mind Treatment. If those words don't make sense to you, they will in a moment. This is by Diane Edelman. And also, for the purposes of today's talk, I picked up a great book by religious science minister, Reverend John Waterhouse, entitled 5 Steps to Freedom, an Introduction to Spiritual Mind Treatment. The topic for today comes right out of a chapter of the book. Thanks, Don. Oh, Don Coburn, back from the Ukraine. Thank you. Oh, John was too in the Ukraine. Thank you. The title for today's talk comes right out of a chapter in the book, and that title is, What is the Purpose? So I thought in addressing this topic today, what we could do is we could think for a moment about what is the purpose of prayer in general. People all over the world pray. Why do we as humans pray? Then I thought we could take a look at specifically what's the purpose of doing a spiritual mind treatment. And then a third thing we'll do today is we'll do what she does in the book, which is when you are about to do a spiritual mind treatment, a specific one, how do you set the purpose? I have to admit that this title, What's the Purpose, also inspired me to think about what's the purpose of my talk? What's the purpose of this month where we are once again speaking about prayer? And I realize that this is a month dedicated for us to get even better and clearer at using this tool, which allows for us to be empowered in our lives. I think the point of prayer is empowerment, that we can move from a life where we feel like we are being tossed about by conditions out of our control, and we can move into a life where we feel like we have some sense of at least helping to create the situations we want for ourselves and other people and the planet. Prayer is indeed a tool of spiritual empowerment. So let's begin in our consideration of this spiritual tool by remembering what Dr. Edward pointed out last week, which is that people in all kinds of spiritual traditions do effective prayer. All kinds of people do prayers that get results. So this caused me to look in some books and also think about my own life history with prayer to consider the question, why do we as humans pray? And I realized that the overriding reason is that we pray to connect with something bigger than ourselves, something more powerful than ourselves. Usually we want to invoke something that has more resources than we do. Does that sound familiar? And often it's in those difficult moments where we might be overwhelmed with things or we might be suffering. We humans often pray for help and for relief. We pray so that we don't feel alone. We sometimes pray to say thank you. And some people, I think, are still praying to a God that they think might be angry, so they're praying to appease that presence, to ask for forgiveness. But in short, I think overall what we do is we pray to connect with God. Now, in all these descriptions that I've given of why we pray, you might have noticed that they're based on an idea of an outside God, of a God that's separate from us. And of course, if you are praying to an outside, distant God, then your prayers will be prayers of petition and beseeching, of asking for favor and forgiveness, and of saying thank you when things do go the way you want them to. But this idea of an outside, distant God is not the way we talk about God here at the center. We don't believe in God and us. We believe in God as us. We believe that you and I are part of God. In his book, Reverend John Waterhouse says, God is not an observer in our lives. God is the consciousness of our lives. God is not an observer in our lives. God is the consciousness of our lives, meaning the life of God lives as us. The intelligence of God expresses through us. The awareness of God itself is who we are. God is not an observer in our lives. God is the consciousness of our lives. So what would prayer look like if it's based on the idea that we are part of God, that we are one with God? How does the wave pray to the ocean? Well, I'm sure it was something that the founders of the New Thought movement had to give a lot of thought to. First of all, they made an attempt to get away from calling that activity of connecting with the divine, of calling it prayer, because prayer has those historical connotations of supplication and beseeching. So what to call it? Well, if you're sick, you go to the doctor for a treatment. So if something's wrong in our life, maybe what we need is a treatment. But we don't want to do a physical treatment. We want to work with our mind. We want to do a mind treatment. But we're not working with our mind in the way that a therapist or a psychologist might, in terms of looking for cause and effect and family history and what's motivating us. We are working with our mind in this treatment from a spiritual point of view, from the point of view to remembering our true spiritual nature. So what we talk about when we are connecting through language with that divine part of ourselves, we talk about doing a spiritual mind treatment. Now the question might come up for you, if we are already part of the ocean of God, and if we already have access to all that God is, then why do we have to pray anyhow? Why do we have to do a spiritual mind treatment? Well, I don't know about you, but there are times when I, as a wave, feel myself being tossed about and have forgotten that I am part of this ocean of God and that everything's available to me. That's when it's time to do treatment. That's why we do treatment, to remember the truth of who we are. To remember that when we think we want something, the truth is that it is already here. We treat our minds to be able to see what has already been given. There's a teaching story about a wealthy man who had always heard that you can't take it with you. And he didn't like this idea because he was very wealthy and he wanted to take it with him. So he prayed to God, and at first God said, no, you can't take it with you. And he kept praying, and finally God said, okay, you can bring one suitcase with you. Put in it whatever you think is valuable, photos of your family, art, stocks, whatever you want to bring. So when the man died, he showed up at the pearly gates with his one suitcase, and St. Peter said, what's this? You know you can't bring it with you, can't take it with you. And the man said, look, I've already straightened it out with God. He told me I could bring this in. So St. Peter said, all right, let's see what's inside. And they opened it up, and the man very proudly stood beside this suitcase full of these gleaming, shining gold bullion bars. And St. Peter was really disappointed. He said, pavement? You brought pavement?